Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Basi Vimbai Rufai, birthday boy. Happy birthday. Good morning to all our viewers out there. I'm going to rush through because yesterday was just a roller coaster. Kicking off with oil. Oil prices, despite the pause in tariffs, the 90-day pause on tariffs, oil was still down. Why? Because China is still your biggest consumer of oil, and those 125% tariffs on China, they are suggesting that they will crimp demand in the nation. So if you are also U.S. oil refiners, article with Reuters talking to them saying they're going to refrain from substantial investments in crude oil processing because the West Texas Intermediate is getting so low, it's going to actually impact their operating margins. Of course, the big news, the tit for tat between the U.S. and, Middle East. Let's talk about the Middle East. Even though the U.S. has a trade surplus with some of these nations, the UAE, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the fall in oil prices is also, it's not just because we put, Nigeria is not the only country we put in focus when we put Nigeria's benchmark. Lower oil prices are also going to impact the Middle East because it is their chief source of income. So keep in mind, because some of these countries still got initial tariffs, even though the U.S. has a goods surplus with them. Goldman had a recession reversal. Basically, at 12 noon, they said the U.S. base case was a recession. At 1 p.m., they said Trump paused it, and then they now reverted back to their initial forecast of, I think, 45% from initially 65. Asian stocks, all green because of the rebound in the pause on the tariffs. The TAIEX in particular, 9.25%. At one point, it was up by 10%. The Nikkei, as you can see, up by 9%. So Asian stocks all rebounding this morning. Whether or not it will last, that is the real story. We also got, I think, China. Inflation, I think they're still in deflation territory, 0.1% contraction for CPI, 2.5%. 0.3%. Year on year for CPI, but for producer price inflation, PPI was 2.5 contraction. And then cost still remained where it was. Also, there's been a growth downgrade from Goldman on China. I think they're seeing them growing by just 4% this year from initial projection of 4.5 and then 3% in 2026 from an initial projection of 3.5. Not sure if you heard the clip. Here, I called this yesterday that it was bond vigilantes that were going to turn Trump around. He was asked why all of a sudden we had a 90-day pause, and he said it was essentially the markets.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, they were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions, because we have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did. No other president. I know the presidents, they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The 10-year yield on bonds spiked, the 30-year spiked, but they said Scott Bessent.
30 years bond yield spike was one of the longest in history.
That we've seen in a while,
yeah. We've seen in a while.
So Scott Bessent, we hear he went to his office and said, Mr. President, we can't. U.S. debts, the outlay for U.S. debt is over $1 trillion per year. So as those bond yields rise, the United States is paying more money to pay down its debt. We understand it may have been Japan and China selling off U.S. treasuries in order to put pressure on them. Who knows? Either way, he blinked and he's now paused, although there's still the 10% base tariffs for everybody else. And the whole thing is so complicated. There's still the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. There's still 25% tariffs for fentanyl on Canada and Mexico. Again, it's just so haphazard. But either way, the markets liked it. If you take a look at the U.S. markets, a big rally yesterday. So historic rebound. The Dow, almost 3,000 points, biggest one-day gain ever in the history of the Dow Jones. S&P had its best day since, a single day since 2008, a 474% climb. The Nasdaq had its best day since 2001. But even then, just to show you how far the markets have fallen, the year-to-date returns are still in the negative for each and every every one of these indexes. And then, of course, you had the recession reversal from Goldman Sachs, where they said, they're still back to, I think, 45% as opposed to 65% for recession, because the 10% baseline tariff is still pretty expensive for all the indexes. And then Nigeria, finally, I think you've already talked about this, the Central Bank of Nigeria putting out some very encouraging numbers on our balance of payments, which includes your current accounts, finance accounts, and the likes. $6.8 billion surplus versus the deficits of prior years.
Okay, Rotus, well, unfortunately, we seem to have run
lots happening
out
today.
of time. It will have been nice to talk about Trump and his erratic behavior with regard to Trump. Even if it's called Besant, he says, this was a plan all along.
All along. No, that was not a plan.
Plan all along to upturn the global trade order and cause problems even for the domestic economy. Thank you, Rotus.